Welcome everyone to the 2021 East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition member annual meeting. I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the Coalition.
I'm Katie Diemel, and I'm your Grower Relations Representative.
So welcome to the annual meeting as a video presentation. We're disappointed as you are that we have to do this online. Unfortunately, with COVID restrictions, we weren't able to secure our facilities and have safe meetings, so we are doing it as you see on this format online. We welcome your comments on this presentation. It's a little longer than our normal live meetings, but we have some very important information we'd like to get to you this year, and we hope you will be able to stay with us throughout this entire presentation. So Katie in a minute is going to talk about the membership packet, walk through all the details that are in that packet, and then I'm going to give you a background on why your dues went up this year. I know that was a shock to many, but there is a lot of information that we want to get to you about why that happened. And then some of you are also in the Modesto interlock management zones and saw the supplemental dues invoice for that. Tess Dunham is going to be explaining to you how that came about and what the regulatory background is with that program. And then Tess and Kenneth Miller are going to be talking about the groundwater protection targets. This is a new aspect of our program that begins this year that has long-term ramifications for our farming in this region. And then Michael Johnson with MLJ will do an overview of the surface and groundwater program. And then finally, we had a recent meeting with the Regional Water Board staff and some of our board members of the East San Joaquin with Regional Board Enforcement Manager Robert Ditto and Sue McConnell, Program Manager. And they're going to give us a few comments on their efforts to identify the non-members in the East San Joaquin area. So hold with us and hope you enjoy this presentation.
We'll go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about the ESJ member packet. These were mailed and emailed out in early November, so you should have received this. If you haven't, please give us a call and we'll get that out to you. In there, you'll find your invoice, your farm evaluation, nitrogen management plan worksheet, irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report, and also your nitrogen evaluation was included in the member packet this year, so make sure you review all of those items. Everything that is due back to us is due on March 1st this year, so make sure your invoice, farm evaluation, and irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report come back into us on March 1st or before. And your irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet should be completed and kept on file, but it should be completed by March 1st. And again, that's one that stays on farm. Next, we're going to just go over member assistance. Things look a little weird this year, again, with COVID, so please make sure you call for an appointment this year to come in to get your member assistance. So all 3 County Farm Bureau office lines are listed there. Please give us a call to make sure someone is going to be here to meet with you when you are available to come in. The web portal has got some new features this year and has everything live, so you can complete everything this year on the new web portal. It's not super new, but something you'll see. Gives you 24/7 access. You can go ahead and enter all your farm evaluation, your summary report. There's a new worksheet tab, so you can do your worksheet, and everything on the portal has all of your current information. It's a great tool. This is sort of the user dashboard, what it looks like. Your member information has your dues, your parcels enrolled. If you have any changes, you can go ahead and look there. Give us a call. You can do some updating there as well. Has a member requirements checklist. You can complete that, print that, make sure you're actually checking them off. You'll see a mapping feature, so you can map all of your parcels. A document repository, so you can look at all of the paperwork that you've turned in prior. Your INMP summary report, same tool as it has been the last couple of years. Your farm evaluation survey is live now, and you'll see the new section there, and that is the INMP worksheet that you can complete online. You can just go ahead as you scroll down, you'll see all of these new documents here, all the new features of the portal. Here on this slide, you can see the INMP summary report entry. This is step 1. The biggest question I get here is remembering to put edit. So if you are going to make any changes here, make sure you push edit and then save changes. There's a place to add parcels, and you can also export this whole entire sheet to Excel. Step 2 has got all of the different nitrogen sources, the management units, yields, and additional information. So you'll make sure you go ahead and enter all of that. You will have to enter everything, something into every box on this slide here. Step 3, this has all of your different practices. So you'll want to make sure your irrigation efficiency practices, nitrogen efficiency practices, you can check one or as many as you want to. So there's no limit, but you will need to select something for each one of these categories. So the new online tool here is the new Irrigation and Nitrogen Management Plan Worksheet portal tool. We're pretty excited about this one, and this will allow you to complete your worksheet at the beginning of the year with your anticipated totals, and throughout the year you can also go ahead and include your new applications, so it'll keep a running total for you if you choose to use it that way. There's a button at the end of the year once you've completed your worksheet and you've gone through and added your new things that you can automatically generate your summary report for you to review and submit. So it's kind of a one-stop shop now for the Irrigation Nitrogen Management Plan worksheet and summary report. Inside the new portal tool, it gives you some calculators, specifically for your harvest planning and especially if you're in irrigation water. So there's some new tools within the new tool here to help you get the best possible numbers, and it gives you the option to print your worksheet, but you can always have access to it on your portal. You can edit anytime, like we were talking about. You can go ahead and add in any of those applications throughout the year. So it kind of gives you that one-step reporting. You can do it right from your field by logging into the member portal. We'll go ahead and transfer over to Perry Clausen to talk about our new 2020 dues levels.
Thank you, Katie. Well, I'm sure you were all surprised to get your membership packet this year and see the increase of the dues for 2021. And I want to give you a little background of why that occurred. So starting in 2015, the Regional Water Board really kicked up its activities for enforcement of non-members. And there were thousands of acres, dozens of growers who'd been avoiding the program since we started and were notified by the Regional Board that they needed to join the ESJWQC Water Coalition. And the Board of Directors has had a policy for years that anyone that was not in the program prior to 2012 would be required to pay back dues. And there were some substantial size growers who paid back dues, current dues, interest, and a penalty to join the coalition to be a member in good standing. So in this slide, you can see through the years, 2015 through 2019, there was a pretty sizable amount of income that came into the coalition that helped offset some of the costs that began increasing in 2012. We also had in place an informal policy, if you would, on our reserves. We started the coalition in 2004 and 5, and one of those years we had virtually complete depletion of our funds before the new dues were arriving for the following year. The board decided we needed to start keeping several months reserve. So we've had about a 6-month reserve in our bank account through the years and have kept it that way up until about 2019. Well, in 2020, we had a pretty dramatic drop in the new membership because the regional board, for the most part, found all the growers who had not been in the coalition. Now, there are some still, admittedly, that are still hiding and not in the coalition that at some point will be brought into the program through enforcement that the regional board has continued and is continuing. So those two factors contributed to the conversation of the 2021 dues level increase. So this lack of income, the lack of reserves that we had used in previous years were not available. So we had to adjust our dues upward. The other major factor is, again, back to 2012, there was a number of new programs that were adopted that had to be implemented and that are now been rolling out in the last couple of years. And then during the whole period as well, the state board continues to increase the per acre charge that each of the coalition in the Central Valley must pay. And as you can see in this chart, it's been dramatically increasing since 2011 when the new program kicked in. And this funding is used to cover the cost of administration and staff at the Regional Water Board. So this year, our dues that we pay to the state board is now $1.12 per acre. So just to give a summary of the major cost increases that have occurred since that 2012 order was adopted that we didn't have in past years. One is this groundwater protection targets. Tess Dunham is going to be explaining here in a few minutes what that program is, but essentially it's going to be shared amongst all the Central Valley coalitions. We are going to be splitting the cost of that program amongst the 13 coalitions that are participating, and it's going to be based on acreage. So we have a pretty significant portion, since our 700,000 acres of the total irrigated acres in the valley is pretty significant. So we have about $100,000 this year that's earmarked for the Groundwater Protection Targets program. And then along with the nitrate control program, which we'll talk about a little bit later, there is the cost that's related to the salt control program. So this is a 10-year study that irrigated ag, dairies, cities, and others will be undertaking, and there won't be an immediate action for us to do anything about salts. That will come at the end of the year, end of the 10-year prioritization and optimization study. However, for us to be in compliance, for our members to be in compliance, we pay part of the $1 million a year study, $10 million over 10 years. Our portion from the irrigated agriculture industry segment is $77,000, as you see here. And then, as we've talked about in the last few annual meetings, we are starting to see more pyrethroid exceedances in our waterway. And pyrethroids is a very expensive insecticide to analyze for. So when we do sediment toxicity testing or the analysis of the water quality of the water column, there is a pretty substantial cost. And the increase this year, because of what we found last year, is estimated to be about $50,000. We won't know until we actually implement the program. And then the continuing program expenses are pretty significant. The salt control program I mentioned, and then this extra pyrethroid analysis is going to be substantial going into 2021. So we continue to face this issue with nitrates in groundwater. We talk about this every year, but it's still top of the agenda for the state legislature and also the regional water and state water boards. And we're dealing with a legacy issue primarily. And it's taken decades for these nitrates to accumulate in the groundwater, but we're having to deal with the outcome of that. One way that the state is addressing that, the State Water Board, is through the Irrigated Lands Program and the Dairy Program for our particular discharges into groundwater. And one of the priorities that is going to continue to be put forward in these programs, and again, you'll hear about this here pretty soon on the nitrate control program for the management zones, is those residences whose wells are impacted by nitrates have to be provided safe drinking water. So there's an effort underway now where the industries that have nitrates in their discharges, and that of course is irrigated ag, dairies, cities, wastewater treatment plants, wineries, food processors, everyone that has nitrates are combining efforts to create a fund to provide those well owners whose wells are above the drinking water standard replacement water. And those efforts will begin in 2021. And there's enough documentation now. This is out of a report that was sent to the state legislature several years back, but it gives an indication of where we are seeing high nitrates and the potential contributions. And the major contributors are from these historic discharges, primarily irrigated agriculture and manure. So out of this order, the biggest impact to growers for your reporting, you've already seen much of it already, is this reporting the nitrogen applications. We're now reporting the crop yield. There's these summary reports that have to be turned in about the practices that we are all using. And as we talk about every year, this is not just East San Joaquin. This is all growers in the Central Valley. And then as a first step to deal with where there's excess applications of nitrogen, there is the program called the Outlier identification. Again, same thing has to be done in all the coalitions, and this is the identification of growers who the reporting has shown to possibly have excess applications of nitrogen. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a minute. All these new reporting requirements that came about in 2012 have a point to them. And in part, it's developing a strategy of how are we going to prove to the public and to the water board that we are not causing or contributing to nitrate contamination in groundwater. So this strategy is what we call strategy for understanding nitrates in groundwater. So first we got to figure out, are we in fact causing the contamination? And then how are we going to measure that if we are, and what progress we're making over time? So there's a couple of different ways we're doing that. I mentioned the crop nitrogen coefficients. We'll go over that a little bit later. But we also have to determine how these management practices may be affecting groundwater, and we're doing that through the Management Practices Evaluation Program. The last and even most complicated approach that's in process right now, and again, you'll hear a little bit more about this, is what's called the groundwater protection targets. That is what we are working on now. Actually, this year, we started last year, and in the coming years, we're going to be developing what are called targets for what we need to do in our practices to meet the drinking water standard in the groundwater aquifers. That's not going to be simple. And it will show us, it'll give us an idea where in our irrigated agriculture practices where improvements may need to be made. Now we're going to have Tess Dunham with Consors and Conway talk about the CV salts process and the management zone development that many of you are now being involved with through the supplemental dues. So Tess has been involved since the initiation of this basin plan amendment process and has a very good knowledge and understanding of this program, and we'll talk about that for the next few minutes.
On May 31, 2018, the Regional Water Board approved amendments to the Central Valley Water Quality Control Plans, or Basin Plans, which include the new salt and nitrate control programs. On October 16, 2019, the State Water Resources Control Board, or the State Board, also approved the amendments, followed soon after by the Office of Administrative Law in January 2020. Tess Dunham is here with us today to talk about the Nitrate Control Program, a key part of the Basin Plan Amendment. She is legal counsel for several Central Valley Water Quality Coalitions and is an attorney with Consors and Conway in Sacramento. Ms. Dunham, along with the Central Valley Coalition leaders, spent the past 10-plus years working on ways to change how nitrate discharges were being regulated by the water boards. Existing enforcement tools, cease and desist orders and cleanup and abatement orders, and the approaching deadlines for meeting the nitrate drinking water standards for agriculture discharges left all industries with nitrate discharges little choice but to develop a different regulatory approach.
So under the Nitrate Control Program that the Regional Board adopted, they are looking to prioritize. It is being implemented by identifying priorities, what we call in groundwater basins or subbasins, as to where the largest problems with nitrate and groundwater exist. The Priority 1 basins, there are 6. They include Modesto, Turlock, Chowchilla, Cahuilla, Tule, and Kings. There is then Priority 2, which is broader. Priorities in the Basin Plan were identified by evaluating nitrate groundwater quality over a substantial amount of time and data, and it was based upon the data and information brought together that the Regional Board, along with the Executive Committee for what we call the CV Salts Executive Committee, established the priority areas, again based upon levels of nitrate assumed to be within the groundwater based upon data that was readily available at the time that the analysis was done. The coalitions receive that notice to comply on behalf of all of its members when they have a groundwater basin in the coalition area that is considered to be a priority for nitrate. Once that notice to comply is received by the coalition, they need to start working and determining how they're going to develop management zones and working with all other dischargers of nitrate. It's important for the growers of the Central Valley to recognize that the nitrate control program doesn't just apply to irrigated agriculture, it also applies to dairies, POTWs, food processors, wineries, any industry that is regulated by the Regional Water Quality Control Board and discharges nitrate is subject to the Regional Board's nitrate control program. Agriculture is subject to the nitrate control program because we know that we cannot farm without applying nitrate-based fertilizers, whether compost, organic, or synthetic. While agriculture has greatly improved how it farms and how we utilize nitrate fertilizers, it's nearly impossible for most crops in the Central Valley to farm without some level of nitrate that might be available to leach to groundwater, even with the most modern of practices that we are employing today. Because of that inherent issue with respect to farming, we need the nitrate control program. The nitrate control program allows the Regional Water Quality Control Board to provide an exception to agriculture for meeting water quality objectives. Typically, the Regional Water Quality Control Board would only allow us up to maybe 5 to 10 years to meet nitrate water quality objectives in discharges below the root zone. With the nitrate control program, the Regional Water Quality Control Board will now have the ability to allow agriculture and dairies and others up to 35 years. This does not mean that we need to show that the groundwater meets the nitrate objective within 35 years. It means that we have to show within 35 years that irrigated agriculture is no longer causing or contributing to an exceedance of what we call the nitrate objective. The nitrate objective is a drinking water standard. It was set by EPA back in the 70s. One of the key components of the nitrate control program, in order for the regional board to give us the flexibility of up to 35 years, we do have an obligation to make sure that those that are impacted by nitrate in their groundwater have access to safe drinking water. It's just a moral obligation that we have. We need to make sure that people have access.
We know that public water supply systems that serve cities and small communities already use treatment to ensure the water they deliver meets the nitrate drinking water standard. But in the Central Valley, there are a lot of small communities of 25 connections or less and rural residences with wells that don't meet the nitrate drinking water standard. So we in agriculture have to pay a share of the cost for providing water to these residences?
That was the trade-off. We make sure people have access to safe drinking water. The regional board is able to give us a longer time period for when we can control nitrate and fertilizer, allowing us to develop the technology and the information that we need in order to move forward. The whole idea with the management zone is that all dischargers are coming together in order to determine how is the best way to address nitrate in the long run and also to make sure people have safe drinking water in the interim. It is the expectation that those in agriculture, as well as dairies and others, will pay for at least the access to interim drinking water. For irrigated agriculture and those growers that are part of the coalitions, you won't necessarily see the direct requirements of the nitrate control program on how it impacts you every day, other than potentially the fees that you pay your coalition. Each coalition will establish on their own how they want to administer and have the administration for those management zones and working with other dischargers. But your coalition will be providing overviews and information specific to how they will implement the nitrate control program for those management zones that are or those areas that are priority under the nitrate control program.
And as so often happens with any new regulations these days, the environmental justice activists threatened to challenge this new approach even before it was adopted. To head that off, a group of permit holders held weeks of negotiations with the Water Board and NGOs. That resulted in targeted revisions to the Basin Plan Amendment to address those concerns. How did we fare?
They did not get everything they wanted. We did not get everything we wanted either. So under the nitrate control program, when a basin is considered to be a priority and the water board sends out the notice to comply, that kicks off the time frame of when actions have to happen. For those priority 1 basins, once the notice to comply was sent, there is essentially a 270-day-ish clock. In this case, the regional board for the priority 1 basins, they sent out the notices to comply in May of 2020, and they've given everybody until March 8th of 2021 to submit a preliminary management zone proposal. There are 3 primary deliverables that management zones will need to put forward. The first one is a preliminary management zone proposal. That preliminary proposal is this is who we are, these are all the dischargers that are participating, this is how we're going to govern ourselves, this is how the area for the management zone, this is the basin or the physical geographic area that is being covered by this management zone, these are all the participants, and also the most important part of that is an early action plan. The early action plan is how is that management zone going to work to try to take care of immediate or interim drinking water needs for those that may have been impacted with nitrates in groundwater. This, under the final management zone proposal, it allows the dischargers to further refine and basically put together their management zone and the governance for the management zone. After that, then there starts developing the management zone implementation plan. So the first 2 deliverables are more about governance and organization and implementation of early action plans. And then the last deliverable is the management zone implementation plan, which is how all of these dischargers in the management zone are going to come together and address nitrates in groundwater over the long run and in their various discharges. I understand that all of this sounds daunting and scary, and it is. However, the purpose of the nitrate control program was to give us that extended time period. 35 years is huge. Being able to give us a 35-year time period and giving the regional board more flexibility for addressing nitrate is helpful for agriculture by far in the long run. Without the nitrate control program and the additional authority that's been provided to the regional board, we probably would be looking at needing to show how we are going to meet in below the root zone in the next 5 years, which would have been an impossible task. So yes, it's going to cost us, and no one likes that. We all understand that cost is difficult. But overall, in the long run, it does give us a launching and a time frame to address the nitrate in agriculture so we can continue to flourish and to maintain the sustainability of agriculture in the Central Valley. We all recognize that agriculture has made great strides in improving farming in order to protect water quality. And we have come a long way. Unfortunately, we just haven't come to the level that we need to. We will get there. You know, agriculture in California, if anything, it's innovated and it's on the cutting edge, and have full confidence that we will be able to get to where we need to be. But we wanted to make sure we had the time necessary to do that.
So to talk more about the groundwater protection formulas, values, and targets, we have Tess Dunham with Consoys and Conways and Kenneth Miller with Formation, Inc. to talk about the process that we are going to be going through to develop these groundwater protection formulas, values, and targets.
When the Regional Water Board in 2012 adopted the new order that mandated reporting of nitrogen fertilizer applications, there was included a requirement to develop what is called a groundwater protection program. This program consists of 3 key components: a groundwater protection formula, groundwater protection values, and groundwater protection targets. The 13 Central Valley coalitions combined efforts to develop one approach for these 3 steps that is applicable to the entire region. A landscape-based model using cutting-edge technologies was selected as the most economical way to understand the contribution agriculture might be making to nitrates in groundwater aquifers.
The University of California, in conjunction with the Almond Board of California and the California Walnut Commission, has spent millions of dollars on field studies that produced valuable information for those crops, but were limited to field-size research plots. If a field study approach were taken for all crops grown in the Central Valley, the cost to growers would be tens of millions of dollars. What the model does is simulate irrigated agriculture in the Central Valley using real-life cropping and management information at a fraction of the cost of performing the multitude of field studies that would be needed. Tess Dunham is working for the Central Valley Coalitions to develop the Groundwater Protection Program. Ms. Dunham is legal counsel for several Central Valley Water Quality Coalitions and is an attorney with Soares & Conway in Sacramento.
What do those three components mean? The formula is that equation to calculate the values. And what is the value? The value is what is happening now with respect to agriculture as it currently exists. And the target is where do we need to go in the long run? Targets will be phased in over time. They will be implemented through the management plans that are prepared by the coalitions, and also the targets will consider recharge and other factors that occur in the Veto zone, but again, it's over time. So the beginning of the program starts with the development of a formula, and the formula was due to the Regional Water Quality Control Board on July 1st of 2020. What this model does is it is used to calculate what is the values at the root zone level. Most importantly, the groundwater protection values are calculated on a township basis. They are not field level based, although we use the information that all of you submit to your coalition. They are calculated and submitted to the water board on a township basis, and so there's one value per township, rather than looking at it on an individual crop or an individual field type basis.
Ken Miller is with Formation Environmental. They are an environmental consulting firm with offices in Sacramento and Boulder, Colorado. Formation works on issues ranging from air quality to water quality, and for clients such as municipalities, utilities, and private industry. The Central Valley Water Quality Coalitions have retained Formation to assist in the development of approaches for complying with the requirement to develop groundwater protection formulas, values, and targets.
We have developed a way in which to do that, to produce the most accurate and reflective estimate possible based on all the available information that is able to be leveraged for this process. That formula will be used to create values which are ultimately nitrate leaching estimates aggregated to the township level, and those values will be used to set targets, which is more of a long-term process to ultimately achieve compliance. On the data side of things, what we would like to do is integrate all the available data, California-specific data, to feed into our formula, to feed into our methods piece. And so on the data side, we're referring to we plan to leverage the irrigation nitrogen management plan data submitted annually by growers on high vulnerability land, and use that information to understand what crops are grown on the landscape and how they are managed, and feed that into our formula. We'd also like to leverage soil information, the most detailed soil information available in California, including spatial and tabular information. And we'd also like to leverage climatic information, the most detailed climate information as well. And so with these different data components, we can then model basically the most representative characterization of Central Valley agriculture with those data inputs. And as those data are procured, we would then integrate them into our methods, which is using the Central Valley SWAP model, which is a process-based model that I can describe in a little more detail shortly, but ultimately allowing that model to be the methods side of the formula component. A lot of thought went into different options, and ultimately this was selected as the most desirable model to use for this specific application. And there's a lot of reasons why we selected SWOT for the application of the Groundwater Protection Program. SWOT stands for the Soil and Water Assessment Tool, and SWOT is a model that was developed by the USDA, Agricultural Research Service, over the past 30 years and has been constantly improved and updated along that time frame. So we know that nitrate leaching happens on a daily time step, right? It happens in events. As water irrigation is applied, nitrate can move through the soil profile. So SWOT actually operates on the daily time step, and so we can simulate those actions in a very granular way. It is a landscape level model, which means it's able to be used to simulate the Central Valley, which is of course a very large area. But the nice thing about SWOT is that we can actually model very small units of area within that larger domain. And so we can actually model down to the subfield level. And so for any given field, if you have a variety of soils, for example, within that field, we can actually model those uniquely and capture all of that information in a very granular way. What the crop actually does in the model is it's planted. We tell it when to be planted. It grows from solar energy. It photosynthesizes. As it's growing, it's accumulating biomass. It's taking up water. It's taking up nutrients. And as it reaches maturity, we can harvest a portion of that plant, remove it from the field. We can remove the nitrogen in that portion of the harvested material from the field. All of that is being captured in the model. And so there's an active crop growing in the model. On the management side of things, you can also be very detailed in SWOT. And so we can prescribe irrigation and fertilizer and try to do our best to represent what people actually do on the ground in the Central Valley. And so what that means is we can tell the model how much we're irrigating, when we're irrigating, how frequently we're irrigating, what type of irrigation we're using. Is it furrow? Is it drip? Is it sprinkler? In terms of fertilizer, we can specify fertilizer type. Within the SWOT model, we're able to digitally farm, right? And so what that means is we can grow a crop in the model, we can irrigate and fertilize when the crop needs it. As I've mentioned, SWOT considers information like climate and soil, right? And so soils, the properties associated with different soils are captured within the model and will influence the way in which nitrogen and water behave within the farming system. So as a function of your soils, water and nutrients will infiltrate at different rates. They'll hold water at different rates. They'll drain at different rates. And all of those different pieces are captured and as reflective as possible in that we're using the most detailed soil information available to us from the National Resources Conservation Service. And so all of these physical processes that are captured in SWOT are reflected. And so that first step is really just getting all of our data, all of our information together and understanding what that data really tell us. What we decided to do is let's try to model every possible scenario under the sun up front, and that way all that information, all those model runs can be generated in a more efficient manner and used into the future with very little upkeep. It's all getting aggregated to the township level. And so while this helps us really create a robust estimate of leaching within a township because we're tailoring all of this information to very unique model runs, at the end of the day, the information that reported is really within that 6 mile by 6 mile township. And so it doesn't actually expose any one given report on that side of things. Step 2 is developing the root zone library. And what this root zone library is it's a massive database, right, of every possible SWOT run that we think is going on within the Central Valley, based on the crop management and yield matrix. For each crop that's grown within the Central Valley, we'll have a book associated with that crop. We'll have many, many, many runs associated with that crop, and all of those runs having an associated nitrate leaching estimate. Finally, once the root zone library has been populated for each crop, then we move on into step 3, right? And that's calculating the root zone values, right? And the way in which we calculate the values is we look and we do a matching exercise between grower reported information. So we look at within that parcel, what soil that parcel contains, what crop was grown, how much nitrogen applied, and what was the yield. And we can look into our library and create a match for that given INP report. And then we match every single parcel within the township. We find a run for each of those parcels, and we roll that up to the township level value. Each crop will have a whole series of simulations associated with it to try to capture all that variability that's been reported in the INP reports. If we were to pull in INP information year after year and try to create a crop map and try to create a scenario for each of those fields within the whole Central Valley, that'd be a lot of work, and it wouldn't be very economical, right? And so there's a much easier way to go about this process. And so what we are proposing to do is to model each crop one at a time across the entire Central Valley, right? And so what that means is if we model one crop within our SWAP model, that means that we're going to grow that crop on every single soil and every single climate, right? And so as we do that, what that means is we'll create that root zone library, we'll create a run for everything under the sun. Even if it didn't happen this year, it may happen in the future. We're anticipating running the model north of 50,000 times. And we know that we can do this within a time frame of roughly 3 to 4 months. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about is having a book for each crop within the Central Valley with all of this information associated in that book, all of these potential model runs, all of these model runs in that book. What our intent is to create a vast library, try to simulate everything that's been reported thus far. If over time we ever need to model new scenarios with respect to management, something that we just haven't captured, we can always add to the library. It's a very flexible approach. And at the end of the day, by going through this workflow, we're actually creating agronomically sound outputs that are going to match INP data. What that means is for each book, for each crop in the valley, we're going to have north of 6,000 chapters, more than 6,000 combinations of climate and soil. And within each one of those chapters, we're going to have 400 and plus pages, those different management scenarios, those different yield scenarios. And so we're creating a very, very dense, very, very specific root zone library that contains all sorts of information that can be used onwards into the future. We'll have well over 2 million, really 2.5 million unique different climate and soil management outputs per crop. And what that means is in the future, as values need to be recalculated with this formula, they can be done so by a simple matching exercise. They can be done by going in to the already created library and looking for the most relevant run to generate that leaching estimate. And so once this product is completed, we can always add to it if needed, but it really is in the hands of the coalitions, and the coalitions will be able to use it onward into the future. What we're actually going through is we're matching, really at the sub-parcel level, all of the most relevant SWAT runs and taking all that information and folding it in to the actual township level value. What is the mass of nitrate that has leached and how much water has leached? As a reminder, a township is 6 miles by 6 miles. It's a 36 square mile grid. We'll be aggregating this based on the farm acreage. So what is associated with that NMP report is what we will be using. As these field studies continue to be carried out by the coalitions and their partners, we can look at that information and compare that to our model output. And we can use that information to continue to refine our model output onward into the future. If we take a lot of time and care putting in the best information possible, feed that into the model, what comes out of the model is a very robust representative estimate of nitrate leaching and percolation within irrigated agriculture.
The values calculated by the model for each township could be considered a snapshot of what is happening today with irrigated agriculture in that area. Then there is a groundwater protection target. The target sets the goal for the long term. Ms. Dunham explains where this is all leading.
Targets will be phased in over time. They will be implemented through the management plans that are prepared by the coalitions, and also the targets We'll consider recharge and other factors that occur in the Vado zone, but again, it's over time. So the beginning of the program starts with the development of a formula, and the formula was due to the Regional Water Quality Control Board on July 1st of 2020. I absolutely believe it will be adjusted and revised over time as we continue to learn about the program and how we are implementing it. But overall, the whole idea was having a metric that could be used to evaluate what we do on the landscape to groundwater without needing to have everybody put wells, groundwater monitoring wells, all over the valley, all over every field in order to evaluate potential impacts. I think that's actually one key component. It's important for us to realize that it's not every township within the Central Valley that needs a groundwater protection value, but it is those that are designated as high vulnerability townships. So, and high vulnerability meaning that they are vulnerable to leaching of nitrate. So that and so then the targets will be developed within a year and be part of our management plans for implementation moving forward. Your coalition will be coming to you and explaining this is what is currently estimated from the SWAP model to be leaching in this across this township below the root zone, and here's potentially what we need to think about as far as making changes moving forward over, hopefully, by tying it to CV salts, that 35-year period, as to how we get to meeting targets. So that is where you, the grower, will see the two programs come together and where you will see what it means to you directly. As many of you may know, there were challenges to the state board's adoption of what we call the ESJ order, and challenges by 3 different environmental justice communities challenging different components of that. And that happened by, I think, March of 2018. So over the last year, 2 years now, we have been in litigation on the side of the State Water Board trying to defend the order as it was adopted, including the anonymous reporting provisions that allows us to maintain your privacy and your autonomous and your confidential information with respect to farming and nitrates and how much nitrates is used in yields in your crops. Luckily, and I'm happy to say that after all of that and the briefing that went on October 23rd, we did receive a judgment from the court, and the court found and denied all causes of actions or claims by the environmental justice community, meaning that they found what the State Water Board did and the regional board combined to be fully within and compliant with the law, and that anonymous reporting did not violate the law. So we were pleased in order to be able to maintain and uphold these key provisions that we had fought very hard to get and keep in the State Water Board's process.
Next, we're going to have Michael Johnson with MLJ Environmental talk about how the crop nitrogen coefficients are used to help us understand the amount of fertilizer that we may be applying that's over the crop need.
Thank you, Perry. A little earlier, Katie talked to you about the nitrogen information that you have to provide to the coalition as part of your INMP summary report. And so what I'm going to do is take a few minutes here to talk about what the coalition does with that information once you turn it in to us. So Perry was just talking about the nitrogen crop coefficients. Those are the coefficients that we use to convert the yield that you report to us to the amount of nitrogen that's removed from the field with the harvest, and in some cases sequestered into permanent tissue, grapevines, the canes, and trees in your orchard. So for example, there is a crop coefficient for almonds that's been developed by Dr. Patrick Brown from the University of California, Davis, and he has determined that there is about 0.068 pounds of nitrogen removed for every pound of yield off of your orchard. That means that if you have a 2,000 pound yield per acre, you are then going to remove 136 pounds of nitrogen from that field. These crop coefficients are sometimes described as the number, And we have some numbers that are good numbers. We have some that we describe as reasonable numbers, which we can use. And there are some crop coefficients that we have to use, but they really need more study. And so here you can see a list of those that we consider to be good, the purple column there. And so crops like almonds and cotton and so on are considered good numbers. Reasonable numbers are considered usable. We could improve them if we have some opportunity, but we're able to use them in the meantime. Citrus, various citrus, grapes, raisin grapes, and so on. There are some that are considered poor. So cherries, figs have almost no information available. We have to use those crop coefficients because we have no choice. But we recognize that they are not very good, and we're in the process of trying to find ways to improve them. And then there are a series of crops for which we have no crop coefficient whatsoever, and we're going to have to find a way to generate those crop coefficients over the course of time. Currently, there is an effort underway. It's funded by the California Department of Food and Ag's Fertilizer Research and Education Program, CDFA FREP, to improve the crop coefficients for a number of the crops that you see here in this slide. So, for example, raisin grapes, peaches, corn as grain, hay, and wheat are all undergoing study to improve their crop coefficient numbers, or in the case of wheat, to actually generate a crop coefficient number, nitrogen coefficient. So for the East San Joaquin, what you can see here in this slide is sort of the percentage of our acreage for which we have good, reasonable, poor, or no coefficients at all. And you can see that for the most part, there's about 96% of our acreage have either good crop nitrogen coefficients or reasonable. In other words, we can use them. And only a small percentage have either poor or no crop nitrogen coefficient at all. So we're actually in pretty good shape overall. That said, we still need to do a little bit of work and improve the coefficients where we can.
So Mike, with the crop nitrogen coefficients, is it going to matter varieties or soil types or different parts of the valley as far as the numbers that are going to apply to each of these crops?
Currently, we have a single crop nitrogen coefficient for all almonds, another crop coefficient for all walnuts. There is no consideration of variety, location, or anything. That's one of the issues that the coalitions know that they need to address. They are engaging the commodity groups, and it's a question now of who is going to sort of investigate that further, whether it's going to be commodity groups or whether the coalitions are going to have to undertake that effort. Okay, so now that we've actually converted your yield to the amount of nitrogen removed, we have to determine sort of where you stand relative to is excess nitrate being moved past the root zone or the potential of nitrogen being moved past the root zone down to groundwater. That is determined by two different measures. And you can see here the first one is the ratio of A, which is the amount applied, of nitrogen applied relative to the amount removed. And the second calculation is the amount of nitrogen applied minus the amount of nitrogen removed. And you can see that with the ratio A over R, if you apply exactly the same amount as you remove, that ratio is going to be 1. On the other hand, for the difference of A minus R, if you remove the exact amount that you apply, that A minus R is going to be 0. The problem with these metrics is that they're not a perfect measure for the potential of leaching because there are several processes that are not included in these calculations that there's no way that we can include them. For example, the timing of nitrogen applications, the amount of nitrogen in each of the applications, how they're applied, where they're applied, the timing, the amounts of your irrigation water. But nevertheless, the regional board is requiring that we develop those measures, the A over R and the A-R from your information that you provide, and then those are provided to the regional board, but they're not provided to the regional board for your operation. You are given an anonymous identifier, both with respect to your number and your location, and so the regional board receives this information, but in no way can it be linked back to you or your farming operation. Grower performance, groundwater quality, the general idea, even if we don't know a lot about sort of the timing of your applications, the amount of applications and so on, is that if you reduce the sum or the difference of A minus R, if that number is lower, you are going to have less of an ability to leach nitrogen to groundwater. It's assumed that this reduced leaching is going to result in improved groundwater quality over time. However, we recognize, and Regional Board recognizes as well, that this process may take decades to realize any improvement because groundwater may be very deep and it could take decades for higher quality leachate to reach groundwater. Some areas, however, with very shallow groundwater, sandy soils, and so on, we might be able to see some improvement in groundwater quality in a very short period of time, sometimes as few as 3 to 5 years. So the key here is that you're encouraged to use management practices that are going to reduce the potential for leaching to groundwater. Okay, the other thing that we use these metrics to do is to identify outliers. The regional board requires that we perform an analysis on the ratio of A over R each year to determine which growers have larger values relative to all others in the coalition that grow that same crop. And what we do is we use a technique called a interquartile range method. We use a slight modification of that method, and we plot them all as box and whisker plots. And then we have to report to regional board which anonymous members are outliers. Again, no member is reported to regional board as an outlier. There's no way that regional board can trace back outlier status to any individual member or any individual parcel that is being farmed.
So when I look at my outlier designation and compare it to the other growers who grow the same crop, that's the metric, right, of comparing myself to others. Are we ever going to be compared to the crop nitrogen coefficient for developing the outlier status?
Yes, your outlier status is currently determined by where you are relative to others who grow the same crop in the coalition region. However, it is likely that outlier method will change, and it will likely change within the next few years. And it will be based on what we call acceptable ranges for the ratio of A over R that are determined for each crop. And currently the coalitions are working with the commodity groups to develop those acceptable ranges. And once those acceptable ranges are submitted and approved by regional board, then your outlier status will be based on that range rather than a comparison to others who grow the crop. In 2020, we had to start with almonds as the first group that we analyzed for outliers. In 2021, we will be expanding the outlier designation to walnuts, pistachios, and wine grapes. So if you receive a notification from the coalition that you are an outlier, just please be aware that notification does not go to the regional board, and the regional board will never understand who is an outlier and who is not. However, if you as an outlier do not improve, and we're going to go to that here, okay, the consequences of having an outlier parcel, there is a requirement, the last bullet point there says there's a requirement to improve and get yourself out of outlier status within 5 years. There are other consequences of being an outlier. One is that you need to have your INMP worksheet certified by a CCA. If you have the ability to self-certify, you need to go back and take an additional class to continue to be able to self-certify. You're going to have to attend a meeting held by the coalition for your crop, for other outlier members who are outliers, and you're going to be required to complete the MPIR, which is one of the forms that was included in your packet, and Katie talked about earlier today. So here you see the list over the course of time of the priorities for the coalition with respect to calculating outliers and doing outreach. One of the things that we're required to do for outliers is we're required to track the practices that are used on your ranch, and we do that through the completion of your MPIRs and then the follow-up surveys that we do. And again, you'll be asked to attend a crop-specific meeting in 2021, and if you are an outlier for again in 2022, perhaps again in 2022. So the key here is that you want to not be an outlier. It cuts back on your workload tremendously. So one of the ways that you can actually do well is to consider the nitrate in your irrigation supply water, if that's groundwater that you pump, as nitrate that your crop can use. There have been studies by the university that demonstrate that the nitrate that is found in groundwater that you pump and apply as irrigation water is every bit as available and every bit as useful as is nitrate that you apply as part of your fertilizer program. So, for example, you can see here that if your well water has 35 parts per million nitrate as nitrogen, and you apply 30 acre inches of water per season as your irrigation water, you're actually applying a little over 236 pounds of nitrate per acre just from your irrigation supply from your well water. We're going to talk a little bit about surface water, our surface water monitoring program, and our groundwater trend monitoring program. So just as a reminder, our surface water monitoring program design, we've divided up the coalition region into 6 zones. I'm going to show you a map here in the next slide of those 6 zones. Each of the zones has 2 core sites, a series of represented sites, and some management plan sites. Core sites in each zone are monitored 12 months of the year for a whole series of constituents that you can see here on the slide. And one of the things that we have to do now is monitor for pesticides that we know are used around that location every year. We're required to go in, look at the last 3 years worth of pesticide use information, and use that to determine which pesticides we have to monitor at that location, at that month, in that year. Represented sites are sites that we monitor irregularly, and generally we only monitor them when we have a problem at one of the core sites. When we have a problem at the core site, and a problem is defined as finding a chemical in the water at a concentration higher than the state allows, when that happens at a core site, we're required to go to the represented sites and monitor for those chemicals at that location. Finally, we have management plan sites, and a management plan is a requirement of the regional board. It's triggered when we have 2 problems at a location for the same constituent within a 3-year period of time. And again, the problem is defined as either having toxicity at that location or finding that chemical at a concentration greater than the state allows. If we do that twice within 3 years, we're required to develop a management plan. The management plan tells the state how we're going to make sure that those exceedances don't occur in the future, but it's accompanied by additional monitoring to demonstrate that the problem has been solved. So here you see the map of the coalition region, And you can see that there, if you look at the color scheme, the light colors are the individual zones. And so if you want to focus down toward the south end of the coalition region, you can see that the light brown, which is Madera County, is called Zone 6. And then the little darker brown are the individual watersheds and the locations that we monitor. And so you can take a look at this. This is probably going to be included in your annual grower report. And you'll be able to see if you live in a watershed in which we monitor surface water for compliance with the waste discharge requirements that the coalition has. I just talked about management plans briefly. We have numerous management plans for all kinds of constituents. What you see here is a little bit of a graphic that only looks at constituents, the copper, nitrate, and pesticides and toxicity. And you can see that early in the coalition's the process 2008, 2009, we generated a very large number of management plans. Starting in 2010, when we started our current outreach program, the number of management plans we generate in each year has gone down, and you can see those are the green bars there with the little numbers on top. The blue line, the blue numbers and the blue line represent the number of management plans that we've completed. And so you can see that when we started doing management plans in about 2010, after 3 years of monitoring, we were able to get rid of 19 management plans in 2012 just for this set of constituents. And we've continued over the course of time to be able to get rid of numerous management plans. We're still getting rid of management plans. We have just submitted a request to regional board to get rid of another, I think, 8 management plans. But the one thing I also want to call your attention to is the slight increase when you go from 2017, 18, and 19 for the number of management plans triggered. And we're going to go into the reason for that. We've seen a slight uptick. It's going to be due to pyrethroids, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. The pesticides that we found in the water in 2019 and 2020 were a set of pyrethroids. And you can see the chemical name there, the bifenthrin, and then you see in bold type the product names, the most common product names. We had a couple of herbicides, glyphosate and oxyflorphin, Roundup and Gol. We detected them, but there were no actual exceedances, so the concentrations were quite low. And then we had a fungicide, which we also detected at a very low concentration. Again, the state did not consider that concentration to be a problem. But for the pyrethroids, there were significant problems, and I'm going to show you this here. One of the things I've done in the past is I've gone through each county individually when we do our annual meetings. I only show one county's worth of results. Here I'm going to show you all 3 counties, one after the other. The results for Stanislaus County, you can see that again, just like last year and the year before that, we have a large number of problems with physical parameters, bacteria, and some nutrients. We tend not to consider those to be particularly problematic. Regional board is really not after us to clean those kinds of problems up because they realize that irrigated agriculture likely is not responsible for a lot of that. But you can see in Stanislaus County that there were some toxicity hits. There were toxicity to algae at a large number of locations, and we're still trying to understand what's the cause of that. And we had sediment toxicity at one location here, lateral 2.5 near Keys Road. For Merced County, again, the same physical parameters and bacteria. We had some copper issues. We always have copper issues. The farther south in the coalition region we go, the more likely we are to find copper in the water. Again, what we've determined is that the copper is not a result of applications from irrigated agriculture, but it's just a natural an issue that naturally occurs that we can't do anything about. And regional board has not pushed us to try to get rid of the copper because they understand also that it's a natural problem. It's a naturally occurring element. There's nothing we can do about it. And the pesticides, you see that there are pyrethroid problems at 8 8 times we had pyrethroid problems, okay? Mostly we had them spread across the coalition region. We had 2 of them at Highline Canal at Highway 99. We also had some algae toxicity, and we had toxicity to a new organism that we need to test this year called Hyalella azteca, and I'm going to go into some more detail on that here in just a second. And finally, Madera County. We have fewer problems in Madera County always because there's always less water in Madera County. So we spend a lot of time traveling to the waterways, water bodies in Madera County and not collecting water because there's no water to collect. That said, we do have a little bit of issue with copper. Again, naturally occurring, not a problem. But the pyrethroid concentration goal units that I'll talk about here in a minute, we do have, we had 3 exceedances this last year, 2 of them at Brenda Slough and then 1 of them at Dry Creek.
So these pyrethroid detections in these waterways, how do we know they're not coming from cities and other users of pyrethroids, like you mentioned?
One of the things that we've been careful to do with our monitoring program is to monitor in locations that exclude urban areas. That said, there could be potentially some pyrethroids that are entering our waterways that aren't a result of irrigated agriculture, but there was really no way to determine that, and for the most part, we monitor only land that is farmed and not urban land. Okay, the reason that we're talking so much about pyrethroids is that the regional board passed a regulation focused specifically on pyrethroids. They dealt with pesticides in the past. Chlorpyrifos was targeted for years and years and years, and in fact now is no longer available on the market. They've switched their focus, regional board has switched their focus to all the pyrethroids that are on the market today. The problem with pyrethroids and what we have, the way we have to monitor them is that we can detect pyrethroids in minute quantities in the water bodies. Very, very small concentrations. We can detect them. And once they're in the water body, they do not break down rapidly. Other chemicals break down fairly quickly. Pyrethroids will stay in their current state for in surface water for weeks, and in sediment they'll stay for months. The other thing that we have to do now is we have to add up the effects of 6 different pyrethroids. We no longer treat pyrethroid chemicals individually. They're treated as one large type of chemical problem, and we have to add up their effects, all 6 of them. So the results over the last year indicate that you can see here bifenthrin, lambda-cyhalothrin, permethrin, cypermethrin, and those product names, we've found those in the water most often, and I'm going to show you here the number of detections for bifenthrin. You can see that's the most commonly detected chemical. Lambda-cyhalothrin is next. Cypermethrin and the cyfluthrin and permethrin have fewer detections, but we are finding them. One of the issues that we're going to have that's going to be difficult for us to sort of sort out is that a lot of these chemicals have uses outside of irrigated agriculture. They're applied commonly by structural pest control companies, around dwellings, around anything that, that with wood that would be subject to ants and termites. But they are used by irrigated agriculture. And if they are and they're detected, the assumption is that irrigated agriculture is responsible for their presence in surface water, and therefore we're going to have to deal with this problem. Here you see a graphic of the locations, the months over last year in which we found the pyrethroids in the water. And the vertical axis there that you see, the 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on, is what's referred to as our chronic goal units, it's basically a reflection of the amount of the pyrethroids that we find in the water. And so what you can see is that for the most part, most locations and most months, we find a little bit. It's not a lot. But again, the objectives, the goals for the regional board are so small, and we can measure them at concentrations that are very, very small, that there are considered problems. But there are two locations, Brenda Slough and Dry Creek, in which we had fairly substantial amounts of those chemicals in the water. And those are particularly problematic, and when we submit that information to the regional board calls us on the phone and says, these are big problems. What are you going to do about fixing them?
So is the water board or any other agencies doing anything about these pyrethroid exceedances that have showed up over the years?
As I mentioned a little earlier, one of the reasons for the focus on pyrethroids is because the regional board has passed new regulations. It's called the Pyrethroid Control Program. We are in the data acquisition phase. We are required to monitor. That's one of the reasons that we're spending so much money. That control program has a monitoring requirement for irrigated agriculture, also for stormwater programs, urban areas, anybody who might have pyrethroids applied in their area. But irrigated agriculture needs to monitor, turn those results into the regional board, and then at some point in time in the future, when the data acquisition period is done, they will decide what needs to be done with pyrethroids. One of the things that the pyrethroid monitoring has triggered is that we have a new toxicity test that we had to start to implement this last October of 2020, and then it will go through the next year. It's a small organism called Hyalella azteca. It's a small amphipod. It's just a little organism that lives right on the top of the sediment, right at the bottom of the water column. It is the most sensitive species on the planet that they've been able to find to the effects of pyrethroids. It's unusual in that it's that sensitive, but somehow they were able to find it, and it is that sensitive, and we now have to use it in toxicity testing. In fact, it is so sensitive to the effects of pyrethroids that it will die, these organisms will die in water that contains pyrethroids at concentrations that we can't even detect. Now, the problem with this is that it's an expensive test. A little earlier, Perry mentioned that the increased cost of pyrethroid monitoring was $50,000. That was up through September of this last year. We've determined that we need this year to perform 127 different tests. And if you think about the 127, that includes both the water quality analysis, the chemical analysis for the pyrethroids, in addition to the toxicity test. The toxicity test is about $825 per test. The total cost, if we don't have to do any more testing than this, the total cost is about a little over $146,000 more than it was last year. Last year when I talked to you, I estimated that it could be as high as $135,000, so I was pretty close, but even then just a little under the new costs. So Perry talked about your due structure. One of the issues that we've got that is fixable is that we're paying another $146,000, almost $150,000 just to monitor for pyrethroids. If we can eliminate the problems with pyrethroids in our water, in our sediment, those costs would drop substantially. And I can remember 10 years ago talking to you as members about managing your organophosphate, your chlorpyrifos applications, and how much it was costing back then. And everything got cleaned up. We did a great job with chlorpyrifos. You as members did a great job managing your applications. And we need to do the same thing with pyrethroids. Okay, I'm going to change gears a little bit here and talk about what we had this last year, the Surface Water Expert Panel. At the annual meetings last year, I introduced this topic. We had just gotten this process started. This was not something that the coalition volunteered to do or ventured into itself. This was generated by the petition by the environmental groups of the East San Joaquin waste discharge requirements. When the state board issued their new requirements back in 2012 and 16, the environmental groups challenged the surface water monitoring program, claiming that there were too few monitoring locations, and they in fact wanted everybody to monitor at the ends of every one of their fields. They said that the coalition did not monitor often enough. We didn't monitor the correct constituents, and they wanted all monitoring information to be public. So their specific suggestions included they would have liked to have seen individual growers monitoring their own discharge and checking the local creeks and ditches running by their property. They wanted that to happen several times a week. And if the growers detected a problem, they would call up a mobile monitoring team that would be on standby 24/7 that would respond to that location and collect additional samples to confirm the problem. They wanted an additional set of monitoring locations that they called integrated monitoring locations that we never quite understood what they meant, but that was one of their requests. And again, they wanted everything, all monitoring information, the edge of everybody's field, the monitoring that would occur there, they wanted all of that to be public information. So that petition went back to the state board to resolve and make a decision as to whether our monitoring program, our surface water monitoring, was adequate. And the state board said, we can't tell. We don't know whether it's adequate or not. So they called for a formation of an expert panel. The regional board formed that expert panel. It had national experts from as far away as New York that were part of the group. And then we spent most of 2020 attending a series of meetings, providing a very large amount of material to this expert panel, after which they pulled all of the information together, the panel did, and they wrote a report about their findings. So their findings, here you see sort of quotes from the actual expert panel findings. And you can see that what they said was basically our monitoring program is solid. There are no serious problems with the way that the program is designed or implemented. And in fact, as a whole, adequate and appropriate. The panel is impressed with the adaptive nature of the program and has routinely led to the identification of exceedances and has been effective in improving water quality. So they liked the program as it was. They did not recommend any changes to the basic design of our program. However, as an expert panel, they felt like they wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't have some additional recommendations that we should implement as part of our program. They wanted additional species for toxicity testing. They added in a species called Chironomus. It's a little worm-like thing that lives in the water. They wanted the coalition to reduce their ability to detect chemicals in the water, develop new methods to detect chemicals in the water. They wanted continuous measurements of dissolved oxygen for reasons that we've never been able to understand. And they wanted to expand the management plan focus outreach program. So what does this all mean? The final report came back from the expert panel to the regional board in December of 2020, so just a few short weeks ago. And the regional board now must decide how they're going to implement the program, if in fact they are at all these recommendations. It's not clear that they're going to make the coalition actually do any of these recommendations. It seems unlikely that they could ignore all of the recommendations, so I anticipate that we will have to do something. It's not clear yet just what we're going to have to do. And part of the problem that we're trying to work with regional board about is that every time you implement some new aspect of the program, it results in increased program costs. And you're being faced with a large number of increases in costs for all sorts of reasons. We're going to try to keep the increased costs due to this expert panel process to a very minimum, or actually eliminate them entirely if we can. Switching gears again, we're going to talk a bit about the groundwater trend monitoring program. Again, this is another required element of our waste discharge requirements. We have to characterize groundwater quality across the coalition region. We need to, over the course of time, document trends in water quality, and we have to determine whether our high vulnerability areas, in other words, those areas that have high concentrations of nitrate in the water, if those areas are becoming larger or smaller. The requirement is that we identify a series of shallow wells, and those are usually within the top 200 to 230, 40 feet of the ground that are screened within the top, say, 240 feet. We currently have 37 wells in our monitoring network, and we have to monitor those wells annually. And here you can see a set of results for the 3 years, 2018, 2019, and then this last August's monitoring results from 2020. And you can see that for the most part, there's a little dashed line down there. That's the 10 milligrams per liter drinking water standard. Any well above that number is considered an exceedance. You can see for the most part, actually, that a large number of our wells, a good number, the majority, are below that standard. There are, however, a few wells that are above that, some substantially. And you can see that we added a whole series of wells this year. Again, most of those below 10, but a couple of them, I think it looks like 3 of them, were above 10, and so we'll have to monitor all of these wells over the course of time, and hopefully those wells with concentrations higher than 10 will start to drop over the course of time. Again, we realize that it could take a long time for a substantial decrease in concentration to occur, especially with water that's down around 240 or 250 feet deep. Here are those results, again, spread out by location. And you can see that the big purple dots there are those wells that are over 20. Anything red or sort of bluish and purple are over 10. And those that are the orange and smaller are those below. And so you can see that there's a relatively large concentration of them around the Turlock area, just south, and there's that one just slightly to the north and west, and a few spread a little farther south. We know that those areas already, the lighter kind of purplish kind of shading in that map is our high vulnerability area. We know already that the groundwater has high concentrations of nitrate in that area. But what actually makes me encouraged is that we have lots of wells in that high vulnerability area that are below 10. So hopefully over the course of time, we will improve our groundwater quality. And as Perry mentioned, demonstrate that irrigated agriculture is doing its part to make sure that there's no contamination of groundwater. One of the things that the East San Joaquin Coalition has done is joined what we call the Central Valley Groundwater Monitoring Collaborative, the CVGMC. This is a group of the Central Valley Ag Coalitions that came together. They're not all of the coalitions are involved, but most of them are. We have joined up to try to reduce the costs of the groundwater monitoring program, and specifically the reporting that needs to be done with the monitoring program. So each of the coalitions in this collaborative is responsible for its own monitoring, but those monitoring data are turned into a common database, and then that database is used by a consultant to generate a report that characterizes groundwater quality across our coalition region and then across the valley in its entirety. And that is going to reduce the costs of this program to every coalition, the East San Joaquin Coalition included.
Next, we have a few comments from the Regional Water Board staff. There's been a lot of discussion at the East San Joaquin Board of Directors meetings about what is the Regional Board doing about the non-member, the non-filers, as they are called, compliance for the Irrigated Lands Program. We have about a 98% participation rate, but with the dues and the increase and others, we are always concerned about the equity issue of those non-members having the benefit of not having to participate in this program. It's an economic benefit. So we've been talking to the Regional Water Board about what it is they are actually doing to make sure that these non-members are brought into compliance. So next we'll have Sue McConnell. She's the director of the Irrigated Lands Program, and Robert Ditto, who is the lead for the enforcement at the Regional Water Quality Control Board.
I'm Sue McConnell, the manager of the Central Valley Water Board's Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. The Central Valley Water Board is committed to getting commercial irrigated lands operations enrolled in the program. In 2018, fines up to $100,000 were issued to growers who failed to enroll, growers that we call non-filers. Last year, during the June Central Valley Water Board meeting, our board directed us to continue to prioritize pursuing and addressing non-filers. And I know that there are some non-compliant operations, some non-filers within the East San Joaquin Coalition area. And I wanted just to say that it is a high priority for the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program to pursue those non-filers. During the beginning of the pandemic, we did pivot and move to mapping of the non-filers to identify who they are so that we could move forward, which we've done since then, towards the outreach and the compliance efforts. I want to turn it over now to Bob Ditto, who is the senior in charge of the Compliance and Outreach Unit in the Irrigated Lands Program, to talk about our recent efforts in compliance and outreach.
So we really focused on our mapping effort and identifying potential members, more or less. So we mapped over 23,000 parcels. And what I mean by mapping is, so we use a GIS-based platform. And our background is Department of Water Resources land use data. So the latest data out for us is 2016. So we use that layer, and then we put everything we know on top of that layer, the existing members, anything we already know from past mailings, any dairies that have been identified, so any known information we put on that map. And then what is left is what we need to inspect. So by inspecting, we're looking at this an aerial view of the parcel and identifying certain aspects of it has potential to be a commercial irrigated parcel. So that creates a list for us. So also with COVID, we talked with our executive management on kind of going with a softer approach, very sensitive time. And so what we introduced was a reminder letter. This reminder letter is a introduction to our program. It's not certified mail, and it just introduces the program, and it's a start to our process. So we get some members that come in to the front door through that process. And then our next step is our directive letter, which is our 13260 directive letter that has more kind of enforceable language in it, gives a time frame of when they need to enroll. We follow that up with a notice of violation, and then no response after that. We end up, or we could end up at our board with an administrative civil liability. So out of this mapping exercise, I'll give you guys a little bit of numbers. We've identified about 2,800 parcels that need follow-up from us in the East San Joaquin area. Again, this is based on our available data. Most of those, I think we've actually identified Most parcels over 100 acres. And when I say parcel, I mean not the actual size of the parcel, but what DWR has described as its land use data potentially being agriculture. So what we're looking at is probably about 100 parcels that we see that are over 100 acres of potential cropland. We are going to be following up with those shortly, and in a bigger mailing. And like Sue said, we have some priorities in terms of our outreach, and what we've really been doing or focused on is focused on the largest parcels and working our way down. So in terms of what we've done this past year, during 2020 and into 2021, we sent out 104 reminder letters in August. We followed that up with 84 13260 directive letters. And then we followed that up with 26 notice of violations. And that, I think, and Phil can clarify that, based on whatever the answer we got from the grower, they're either a member or they're not irrigated or they're under another program. So, and Phil can go that a little bit later. Let's see. We just sent out another enrollment batch of reminder letters to 129 recipients. It covered about 147 parcels, about 4,700 acres. So again, we're going to follow that up with another over 100, and then probably end up doing a kind of a mass mailing of directive letters based on those responses. I also want to tell you guys a little bit about, we have other things we do as well. So enrollment is one of our top priorities. We also have to follow up with members with annual reports. So late annual reports, typically at the end of July, when we receive the participant list, the member list, we get that information on who's late, and we follow up with that. So currently we have about 313 members to follow up with. And we are in that process right now. We're about to send out notices of violations for, about 300 members. We also deal with drop members. So members that don't pay their dues, they're actually put into the list as dropped from the program. And so we do follow up with them as well. And we have about 80 members to follow up with there.
We'll quickly go over the member packets, what's included. So just when you're flipping through that packet you'll see your member invoice due March 1st. Your farm evaluation survey, you haven't had to do that in a couple of years. So back to farm evaluations, make sure you complete that. It does look a little bit different, and that one's also due on March 1st. Your irrigation nitrogen management plan summary report, it is the same as it was last year. So go ahead, complete that one, submit it back to us. The new irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet, it's the same as it was last year, but it's somewhat new. Make sure you fill that out, complete it, keep it on farm, get all the required signatures. You'll want to make sure that one's in your file in case there ever is an inspection. And don't forget, we do have that new worksheet tool on the website. Sediment erosion control plan. If you've already completed this one, you don't have to do it again. Just go ahead and make sure that one's on your file. That's not one that comes back into us, and it doesn't have to be updated unless things on your farm change. The nitrogen evaluation packet, this is a new section in the overall packet. You did get a separate mailing of this last year. This year it looks over several different crops, and it tells you if what that acceptable range was. Mike went over this pretty extensively, so make sure you go over that section in your packet. It is pretty important. You will see, if you are an outlier, it will have that MPIR survey, and you will be getting an information on a crop-specific meeting coming up. Next thing to go over here is the coalition overview. We're in year 18, I believe that's correct. It was formed in 2003. There's about 3,200, almost 3,300 landowners, cover over 700,000 irrigated acres. We cover Madera, Merced, Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Mariposa counties. Couple new changes in reporting. This year that farm valuation is required, so it hasn't been required in the last 2 years. It looks different than it has in the past. Some of the things that were previously on the farm evaluation are now on that irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report. The MPIR surface water. So if you are in one of those management plan watersheds that Mike was speaking about, you need to complete this surface water survey. You'll get a call from myself or Wayne Zipster to come out. We'll meet with you. This year we've been doing them over the phone, of course, but it's a survey that we complete to talk about some of those problems that we're specifically having in those watersheds that are in a problem area. So if you do get a letter about a surface water MPIR, please call us and we'll be reaching out to you as well. The same thing goes for the MPIR for groundwater. Mike went over these as well, but this is specifically if you are an outlier, you have to complete this extra survey and come to an additional meeting. So pay attention. We'll be sending out information about these upcoming meetings. And then, of course, the summary report, the Irrigation Nitrogen Management Plan summary report is required of all members this year. And previously, there's been a couple different designations, large farms, small farms, and now everyone's included. Even those in low vulnerability areas are expected to turn this in. So if it's your first year, give us a call. We're happy to help. Again, all those numbers were listed earlier of all the different county offices that have people available as a resource. Further going over that Irrigation Nitrogen Management Plan summary report, you will need to have it signed off by a CCA, a Certified Crop Advisor, or go through a self-certification. Those are still being offered. We're hoping to have some of those virtually this year, so stay tuned for that. Those classes, they'll be posted on the website. We'll be posting information via email. We'll also be sending out postcards as soon as we know more about those self-certification, but CDFA is working to have an online course for those available. Anyway, just make sure you're staying tuned for that. As far as the sediment and erosion control plan, we're also working on a web-based class for that, so those also require a certification. Or a signature from someone who's certified. You can go through the self-certification course. It's a one-time course. There's no continuing education required for this one. So pay attention. You can sign up on the ESJ website. We'll email you and send out a postcard as soon as those courses do become available. So the Irrigation Nitrogen Management Plan summary report, it was all included in your packet. Remember to keep the worksheet on file. That stays with you. And then the summary report, you want to keep a copy of it as well, but you want to send one back in to us. They were all mailed out in that November packet, but they are due on March 21st, so don't forget those. This is just kind of a quick look at what that survey, the worksheet specifically looks like. It's the same as it was last year, but a couple of new features in the last 2 years. Specifically, you'll see that crop evapotranspiration number 2 under pre-season planning, and the anticipated crop irrigation. I get a lot of questions about these, so one thing to note is it's perfectly acceptable to put a range in there, what you anticipate falling within. It's kind of hard to predict that early in the year. And good resources, especially for ET, is your farm advisors in each county. They can give you very good information if that's not a tool you've used in the past. And then you'll see irrigation efficiency practices, nitrogen efficiency practices, and irrigation methods. So that's 1, 5, and 8. Those all previously used to be questions on your farm evaluation. So they've moved over here, and those are something you'll also see now on the summary report. This next page is the summary report. It kind of has, everything that's been on there last year is still on there. You got to put who completed the forms, the crop year harvested. Make sure this says 2020 because we're looking at what you did last year. Submittal date. The step 2, you only check that box if you're an outlier. You'll see the information about outliers in your packet. And the certification method, this is who helped you certify your plan. So if it was a CCA, you would check the first box. If you went through the training program and you're self-certified, you'd check that second box. And if you do not apply any fertilizers, you would go ahead and check the very bottom box there. Kind of a newer thing, it's in the last 2 years. You'll see there's 4 different sources for nitrogen that we want you to split out. So in and irrigation water, organic amendments like manure and compost, dry and liquid fertilizers, and foliar applications. So make sure you go ahead and split out your total nitrogen sources in those 4 categories. And another question I guess I get a lot is the yield info. So for instance, if you were putting your yield as 2,000 pounds of almonds that you got per acre, your yield info might be meat weights because you're specifically measuring that 2,000 pounds was meat weights. So in shell for walnuts, kind of some different areas or ways to, describe what your yield actually looked like when it was coming off the field, and you put it on your plan here. This next page of the summary report, these are all of those practices. So this is talking about your irrigation systems, different irrigation efficiency practices, like has it ever been laser leveled, or use of ET in irrigation, and your nitrogen efficiency practices. So split fertilizer applications, you're applying more than once per year. So you can check as many of these boxes that apply, or as few that apply, but there should be a box that applies for each category. So go through, make sure you're really paying attention to those different practices as you go through. So if you have any questions regarding the summary report or the worksheet, please reach out to all of us here at the Farm Bureaus that act as your Water Coalition staff. We've got plenty of people that can help walk you through it, especially even over the phone. We can get you through on the portal. Let us know if you have questions and how we can help you. We would be more than happy to do that. And the last thing for us to cover today is the ESJ board member ballots. So you should have received these. These went out on January 14th. We would like to thank all of you members for sending in your ballots for those new board members. We chose to expand the board with the bylaw addition last year and expected ballots back on February 23rd this year, and we are pleased and excited, and I would like to welcome 3 new board members to the board. In Madera, we'll be welcoming Joseph Biscay and Mark Hudson, and in Merced, we'll be welcoming Brad Samuelson to the board. These guys offer tremendous expertise in the East San Joaquin area, water quality, tons of issues here to be on your team and go to bat for you as a board member. So welcome to the board. Thank you very much for submitting your ballots.
Thank you for bearing with us through this video. We hope it is informative and fills you in on all the activities we're involved with. We are hoping that the COVID-19 restrictions are lifted so that we can have actually an annual meeting in person this year. We're not sure of that yet. We will be sending out a postcard to members to inform them if we are able to schedule a meeting in November timeframe this year. So again, thank you for joining us today, and good luck this year. Thank you.